All right, Duskmorn previews have started, so I guess I need to talk about the commander that I'm excited about, right? That's the thing I gotta do. And you know what? If I'm gonna talk about a commander I'm excited about, I may as well go ahead and build him in the exact way that you all expected me to. Taking one of the decks I'm hyperfixated on, or is a special interest of mine. I don't freaking know which the difference is right now. And we're just going to build that. We're just going to force him to be that, whatever that deck is. So let's go ahead and talk about the Jolly Balloon Man and ignore the price because he's not, he doesn't exist yet. And whatever that price is, doesn't matter. When he comes out into the game, his price will settle out and we'll figure out what the hell it is then. Till then, we're going to make a $15 deck where the criteria is the commander is usually under $1 and the deck can be $15 total, give or take a little bit in change depending on what the market is doing at the time. Let's talk about a guy who really should be a Rakdos commander, but somehow ended up being a Boros commander. The Jolly Balloon Man is somehow a Boros commander, and he's got a wonderful ability. He allows himself to be tapped to create a token that is a copy of any other creature we control. Turns it into a 1/1 red balloon, and of course, he has haste already built in. We only get to do this as a sorcery, which will limit some of the things we get to do with this ability, but holy shit, this is my kind of commander. I love copies, I love tokens, I love breaking things by making a lot of those things. And somehow, instead of making this in, I don't know, blue, which would make perfect sense, or Rakdos, which would make even more sense, Blizzard decided that, or not Blizzard, Blizzards of the Coast, Wizards decided that Jolly Balloon Man is going to be a Boros commander. White makes 1/1 tokens, that makes sense. Red sacrifices things and makes copies of things sometimes that have to be sacrificed at the end of the turn, so that makes sense as well, but the flavor of combining those two is Grixis at the very least, right? This should have been a Grixis commander. But since it is a Boros commander, then we're going to make use of that ability to the nines. Now, if I tell you that I took one of my favorite decks in Modern and turned it into this guy's entire engine, would you believe me? Because welcome to the 16-card Modular package. So for those who don't know, a modular creature is one that comes into play with an amount of 1/1 counters on it equal to the modular ability, and when it dies, it will put those 1/1 counters onto any other artifact creature that you have. Now, this is great for our commander because he's going to create copies of these little guys and kill them. Oh, and the copies he makes will be stronger than the modular creatures. So typically, when you use a card like Jolly Balloon Man, he ends up creating stuff that is weaker, right? Weaker than the original. If I were to make a 1/1 copy of, say, Metastatic Angel, that would be a 1/1 instead of a 3/1. But uniquely, because a card like Jolly Balloon Man is copying things like Arcbound Mauser, that normally is a 1/1 due to its modular ability, it'll be a 2/2 in the hands of Jolly Balloon Man, because he'll make a 1/1 token that will come into play with a 1/1 counter. This means that certain cards that typically are kind of bad because they are 0/0s will just end up being a little better for us, right? If we were in green, cards like Death's Presence would suddenly be a lot stronger, but as we are not, well, let's focus on what we do have access to, beginning with Arcbound Javelin. This card is a 1-mana drop, comes out super quick, and it lets you remove X 1/1 counters from it to deal X damage to target attacking or blocking creature. Sometimes this doesn't come into play, but if you're dealing with an aggressive deck like a dragon deck or an elf deck or a sliver deck, oftentimes you can stack enough 1/1 counters on this guy to prevent your opponent from getting a key creature through to you. It's really funny to give him Death Touch and just annihilate something that's trying to go at you anytime. Like that. Honestly, there are some funny things to do with this deck. If you choose to upgrade this deck, an Urza's Saga and a Basilisk Caller don't actually hurt too terribly much, as the Urza's Saga can already pull some key cards out of the deck, and the Basilisk Caller can go on stuff like this guy, and suddenly you're off to the races. Then we have Arcbound Prototype. It's the same thing, but Modular 2 with no ability to kill things. Arcbound Tracker is the same thing, but it's 3 mana with Menace. Arcbound Mauser is the same thing, but it's a 1/1 with Lifelink. Arcbound Shikari is a bit different, though. It's got Modular 2, and this is one of the best ones to clone. If you have Arcbound Shikari, when it enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on every other artifact creature you control. So every single time we copy this guy with the Balloon Man, we are basically proliferating our board up. And then, of course, when the token copy of the card dies, because of Balloon Man's effect, we will actually benefit from that because those counters will just go onto other cards. Then we have Iron Apprentice, who doesn't have Modular, but he does have Pseudo-Modular. He enters the battlefield with a 1/1 counter. If he dies, his counters go onto any other target creature. He is technically better than a modular creature in some ways because he does give the 1/1 counters to non-artifact creatures, which sometimes comes in handy in certain decks. In our deck, however, it's not going to make too much of a difference unless you only have one way to kill somebody, and that's with commander damage, in which case we can use Iron Apprentice to throw all of his counters that he's gained from the other modular creatures onto the commander and then punch somebody in the gonads with the Jolly Balloon Man. I'm not saying you should do it. I'm saying that it is one way to deal with a Soul Sisters player who is at like 12 bajillion life points and says, that means I'm never going to lose. And then we just respond with, commander damage goes brrr. Anyways, Arcbound Whelp is probably one of the worst modular creatures in our list, but it has fire breathing and modular too. It's also got flying. Arcbound Slasher is really cool. It's got Riot. He enters the battlefield with either haste or an extra 1/1 counter. So for 5 mana, you get a 4/4 with either haste or a 5/5 that is normal. With our commander, though, we can always just make him a 6/6 because he'll be a 1/1 with 4 modular counters and then 1 counter from Riot because we don't need him to have haste. If we look at Jolly Balloon Man, he gives the creature flying and haste to begin with. So we will make a copy of Arcbound Slasher. It'll be a 6/6 flyer in the air. It'll punch somebody in the nuts. And then when he dies, his 5 counters will go on to something else that is important. Like, say, an Arcbound Bruiser, a 5 mana vanilla modular 3 creature, or Zabaz the Glimmer Wasp, who says if a modular triggered ability would happen, you get another 1/1 counter on top of the one you originally had. He also can let you blow up artifacts you control to get modular early, and he can give himself flying if we aren't making copies with the Balloon Man. The copy will auto-die because of legendary, though, so only in certain circumstances is that necessary. Circumstances like ones that involve the Ozolith if you upgrade the deck. Also, should be noted, Modular has 2 abilities, right? Modular is both a triggered and a static ability. So the come into play with 2 1/1 counters that Arcbound Hybrid has is a static ability, whereas the movement of the counters to another card is a triggered ability. This means something like Zabaz the Glimmer Wasp doesn't give us extra 1/1 counters on a modular creature when it enters the battlefield, like say a Hardened Scales would. It only gives the extra counters when something dies, which does benefit our commander. Arcbound Stinger has flying and modular 1. Arcbound Fiend has modular 3 with the ability to get more counters later in the game. Arcbound Worker has modular 1 and costs 1 mana, and Arcbound Slith has modular 1 while costing 2 mana. He also has the ability to give himself 1/1 counters when he dies, which comes in handy because with our commander, we will have a 1/1 Arcbound Slith on the board that will never attack. Our commander makes a copy of the Slith as a 2/2, it punches somebody and becomes a 3/3, and then immediately throws the counters onto something else, growing it ever bigger, because once we give Arcbound Slith flying with our commander by making a token, we will always have access to more damage from it. Finally, we have Scrapyard Recombiner, who has modular 2 and the ability to sacrifice any of our artifact creatures to search our library for a construct card if you decide to go the route of having constructs in your deck. In this deck, I haven't really decided to put any constructs in. There are 7 that just happen to be in the deck, and they are very good, but all in all, this is not a construct deck. The only construct that I think you need to look for in the beginning, though, is going to be Scrap Trawler. This is part of our 8-card recursion package, since with this deck we are killing our cards a lot, and even though we are killing tokens, sometimes the real cards make their way into the graveyard. Scrap Trawler says when it or another artifact is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, return to your hand any artifact with mana value less than that. Just clone a big artifact with our commander and then get Scrap Trawler's ability. Karmic Guide can revive any one of our creatures from the graveyard. Sun Titan and Redemption Choir can revive any of our cards with mana value 3 or less. This can be used to get back fetching lands and also can be used to revive our modular creatures. Tashar says that whenever we cast a historic spell, return a creature with mana value 3 or less from the graveyard. For us, this is going to be our modular creatures. We summon a modular creature. He's historic because he happens to be an artifact. We revive a modular creature, and we're off to the races. You can also use Feldon of the Third Path to create token copies of creatures in our graveyard and give them haste and sacrifice them at the beginning of the end step. This is, of course, a way to abuse our commander even further. Feldon of the Third Path is basically a version of our commander, a lieutenant, if you would, if we were trying to keep things in the graveyard. But note, the Jolly Balloon Man creates a token that's a copy of any creature we control, not a non-token creature we control. So, if we have something supremely important, like, say, Arcbound Shikari in the graveyard, we can then use Feldon of the Third Path, create a copy of the Arcbound Shikari, giving all of our creatures a free 1/1 counter, and then we can make a copy of that Arcbound Shikari with our commander, putting more counters on the entire board once more, and then after we do that, when they die at the beginning of the end step, they will distribute their counters, making the board even bigger. You can create some absolutely bonkers board states with these cards when used in tandem. Junk Diver, if it dies, returns any artifact from our graveyard to our hand. Just create a token copy of this and let it die. Free recursion. We can also use Wake the Past to return all artifacts from our graveyard to the battlefield in one fell swoop. It also gives them haste until end of turn. There are many cases where this will just end the game for us, and that is a perfectly reasonable outcome for shitting out all of these guys on a board, right? That said, we also need ways to synergize with the counters that we are distributing. So let's go ahead and talk counter synergy. We have 8 cards for that. This is a Throne of Geth. It allows us to sack an artifact to proliferate. If one of our artifact creatures is about to die due to our commander's ability, just sacrifice it to the Throne of Geth to get a free proliferate off of it. Threefold Thunderhulk is also nutty with our commander. This enters the battlefield with 3 1/1 counters, and when it attacks or enters the battlefield, it makes a number of 1/1 colorless gnomes equal to its power. Now, not only is its power able to get bonkers huge, right? Because we can just throw 1/1 counters on it because of our commander blowing up all of our artifact creatures. But if we use our commander to create a copy of the Threefold Thunderhulk, then things get really weird. So he does the gnome thing based on what his power is, not the number of 1/1 counters on him. So if we make a Threefold Thunderhulk for 7 mana, that creates 1 3/3 creature and 3 1/1 creatures. A pretty bad rate of return. But if we sink 1 more mana into it, that's 8 mana, and we tap our commander, we make a second Threefold Thunderhulk. A 4/4 creature that is generating 4 1/1s and has haste, so it will swing that turn, generating 4 more 1/1s. Now, for 8 mana, we've made a board state that comprises of 11 1/1 creatures, 1 3/3 creature, and a 4/4 creature that's going to die, so it behooves our opponents to not block it. It behooves them to just let it go through and do its damage. And we get to do this every single turn. This is ignoring our ability to increase the amount of 1/1 counters on it with cards like Steel Overseer, which puts a 1/1 counter on every artifact we control. Also, our creatures with 1/1 counters that have very bad base power and toughness, usually 0, sometimes 1 because of our commander, we can manipulate further with cards like Sigarda's Summons. This gives all of our creatures with 1/1 tokens or 1/1 counters a base power and toughness of 4 and flying. This means that if we use cards like, say, Wake the Past and revive our entire graveyard with this on the board, we have an army of hasting angels that will be able to kill our opponents in a single hit. We also have more ways of giving all those creatures flying with Abzan Falconeer, which gives them all flying if they have a 1/1 counter. Together Forever is another way to reuse our 1/1 countered creatures, as if a creature dies with a 1/1 counter on it, we can go ahead and put that card back in our hand for the low cost of 1 mana. Metastatic Angel says when another non-token creature enters the battlefield under our control, we get to proliferate, which is really cool, because we can just summon an artifact creature with this deck, as we have 48 creatures in it, and proliferate all the 1/1 counters we have on the board. Then we have Argus Coast, probably the best target for our commander's ability. When this is targeted by any ability that targets only it, we can pay 2 mana. And if we do, copy that ability for every other creature we control that is a valid target. Now, not only do we make a copy of Argus Coast, which dies automatically because of, legendary rule, we get to make a copy of Arcbound Bowser, and Arcbound Shikari, and Arcbound Stinger, and Arcbound Feed, and Arcbound Hybrid, and Iron Apprentice. We get to make a copy of all of these, all at once, all as 1/1s with flying and haste, punching one opponent in the throat very, very hard, ripping their nutsack off with voracious glee. Argus Coast is a win con in the deck if we have a board state built in any way, shape, or form. But it gets better. What if Argus Coast is on the board with our other win con, Thundering Raiju? When this card attacks, we get to put a 1/1 counter on any target creature we control, then deal X damage to every opponent, where X is the number of modified creatures we control. Now, here's where things get a little nutty. Let's say you have Thundering Raiju out and 1 or 2 modular creatures. He swings, putting a 1/1 counter on one creature. Now, suddenly, everybody's burning for 3 damage. 2 modular creatures plus 1 modified from the Thundering Raiju. Except our commander's making a copy of Thundering Raiju, as he's not legendary. Now both Thundering Raijus are swinging and modifying 2 creatures. Now these 2 artifact creatures that are giving us 2 modifieds are now 4 modified creatures, and it's 2 Thundering Raijus, so we're dealing double damage. This is now 8 damage with virtually no board state. If we have Thundering Raiju out and Argus Coast out and a couple of these Arcbound creatures, and we target Argus Coast with our commander's ability, which will create a copy of the Thundering Raiju and all of the artifact creatures we have on the board, we now potentially have a board with 8, 10, or even 15 modified creatures in some way, shape, or form. After we have this absolutely clogged-ass board state, the 2 Thundering Raijus will deal about 30 damage to each opponent. And that's not even counting what happens when the flying creatures that we made with our commander's copied ability attack everybody themselves. This is ignoring damage coming from the creatures. This is just damage coming from the Thundering Raiju. The ability for this deck to create a board state that is hard to read for our opponents, but so close to annihilating everybody's life so quickly. God, I love Hardened Scales decks. I absolutely adore Modular as an ability. It is what made me play Modern in the first place. God, I need to build this deck so bad in paper. Holy shit, I do not have a choice. That said, we need to move on from all of this madness and instead go into something a little more important, like how we're going to actually draw cards in this deck to get to any of these combos, right? Draw power in our deck is a little bit weird because it looks kind of like we are going to be going for a blink package with certain cards and a different deck with certain others. We've got an 11-card draw package. Let's go ahead and go over each one. Mindless Automaton's the first one. Enters the battlefield with 2 1/1 counters. We are allowed to discard a card to put a 1/1 counter on it. We can remove 2 1/1 counters from it in order to draw a card. This is one of the strongest draw cards in our entire deck. Let's say you play Mindless Automaton. Don't do anything with it. No need. Mindless Automaton's on the board. We make a copy of it with our commander. Now, we can just remove all the 1/1 counters from the new one, and if it dies at the end of the turn, we don't care. We're just drawing extra cards. If we happen to do any proliferating or adding of counters on top of that, then sure, that's just extra gravy. But we have access to a basically 1 mana draw 2 every single turn as long as we have a Mindless Automaton. This card is absolutely bonkers in our deck. Then we have some of the cards that look like they're from a Blink deck, like Inspiring Overseer, Spirited Companion, Wall of Omens, and Priest of Ancient Lore, and Skyscanner. All of these are the same card. They enter the battlefield and draw us a card. We want to get them to be replacements for themselves when they come on the board, and we want to use our commander to make copies of them every now and again to get a better hand. We are trying to use modular creatures to advance our board state when that is necessary, and use these to advance our hand when that is necessary. Also, because these cards will kill themselves at the end of the turn, we are also adding in a Circuit Mender and a Filigree Familiar, which gain us life and give us draw when they die. Because our deck is making so many tokens, we're also going to add in an Idol of Oblivion, which will let us draw a card every turn, as long as we are willing to get tokens on the board. Then, because we are always making 1 or 2 creatures a turn, Rumor Gatherer is an obviously easy fit. Whenever another creature touches the board, scry 1. If it's the second time this has happened this turn, draw a card instead. In any game where you happen to have multiple creatures in your hand where you can play them on the board, make a copy of the Rumor Gatherer so you'll be able to scry multiple times in the turn and draw 2 in that turn as well. This card is very strong with our commander. Then we have Thopter's Shop. If one or more artifact creatures die, draw a card once per turn. We can also make Thopters with it. Boy howdy, if only our commander had a way to make creatures die. If only! That said, that's it for the draw package of the deck. For Boros colors, I think we'll actually be able to get through a decent bit of our deck with just these abilities alone. But let's move a little further into our removal package to talk about how we're going to cuck our opponents. Now, for our removal package, once again, we want to focus on cards that have an enter the battlefield ability so we can use our commander to abuse that ability to the nines. So if I told you that the first one we're going to talk about is Meteor Golem, would you be surprised with me? I don't think even one of you would be surprised. I adore this card whenever somebody tells me that's not a super powerful card. It's not one of the strongest effects in the game. Bullshit. The ability to have Omni removal in any color combination whatsoever in decks that have the ability to expressly abuse that effect is absolutely bonkers. And in this deck, that is no exception. Meteor Golem touches the board, blows up one thing, then our commander allows us to reuse that ability every turn, sometimes multiple times. We'll get into that. And G Willikers. I wonder what happens when our opponent's boards are turned to Swiss cheese. Buy a 5-cent card everybody has 12 copies of that are being used solely to support their sofa because they couldn't think of any other garbage card to be used as a joist. Then we have Duergar Hedgemage, which can blow up a artifact or an enchantment or both, depending on what lands we have on the board. Then we have an Abrade to blow up an artifact or deal 3 damage to a creature, Rip Apart to blow up an artifact or enchantment or planeswalker or creature. Then we get into Chaos Warp and Generous Gift, 2 kinds of Omni removal that we can use to get rid of problematic pieces of a board state. Then we have Zealous Conscripts. When this enters the battlefield, gain control of any permanent until end of turn. Untap that permanent and give it haste. Oh, the ways you can steal victory out of the jaws of defeat with this card. Imagine being able to use this effect every single turn ad infinitum. Our opponent has some really strong thing like an Archon of Cruelty. No. Our Archon of Cruelty, comrade. I will use it on my turn, and you may have it on yours. Then we have Aerial Extortionist, which enters the battlefield, deals damage to, or deals combat to a player. It exiles a non-land permanent that player has, and then they can cast that spell later, and if they cast that spell later, then we get to draw a card. So when I tell you that dropping this on the board, getting rid of a thing, and then having our commander create a copy of this, getting rid of another thing, and then hitting somebody in the face with that thing, with that Aerial Extortionist copy we made, because it has haste, means that dropping this on the board removes 3 things that are on the board that are threatening us, and potentially draws us 3 cards when our opponent tries to put them back on the board. That is music to my ears, and it should be music to yours as well. Then we have Skyclave Apparition, which can get rid of any non-token permanent with mana value 4 or less, and Duplicate, which can exile any non-token creature. And that's not all. We also need to have some kind of board wipe for if things get uniquely hairy. So we have an Austere Command. Now, I like Austere Command a lot, but I chose it specifically in this deck because there's lots of situations where you need to get rid of artifacts like Bolas's Citadel or get rid of enchantments like Omniscience. But The other reason is we have the ability to choose to get rid of certain creatures on the board. So let's say we only have to worry about the big creatures on the board. We blow up all those and our big modular creatures die, but again, because of how our deck works, they will throw their counters onto things like Arcbound Mauser and Arcbound Tracker. Let's say the opposite is true. We're fighting an elf deck or a sliver deck with lots of little creatures that just need to be yeeted into oblivion. We choose to blow up all the little creatures, like the Tracker and the Mauser, and suddenly their counters are going onto the Arcbound Hybrid and the Arcbound Fiend. This means that no matter what modes we choose, we will be able to keep enough of our creatures, and those creatures will have all the counters, so we are actually losing any major board presence. We are just trading a go wide board for a go tall board and still wiping our opponent's boards out entirely. That said, let's go ahead and talk about mana. Mana for this deck is a bit interesting in that we don't have to worry about it as much as other decks because we have a lot of the deck that's very, very low curve, and also a lot of our deck is colorless. This makes our job very simple. We only have to use about an 8-card ramp package to get this deck going, and a couple of these cards serve double duty. A core cartographer can get any planes out of the deck. This means any planes whatsoever, so we can get dual lands with this. Foundry Inspector discounts the cost of all of our artifacts. Mind Stone is a basic mana rock that can sacrifice itself for draws later. Wayfarer's Bauble gets a basic land out of the deck. Arcane Signet's a basic 2-mana mana rock, followed by Talisman of Conviction, which is also a basic 2-mana mana rock. And then the big boys, Solemn Simulacrum, one of my favorite cards in Magic the Gathering. When this card enters the battlefield, we get a basic land. When it dies, we draw a card. Boy howdy, if only our commander liked cards entering the battlefield and dying a lot. Boy, wouldn't that be weird if our commander had an ability that cloned creatures so they entered the battlefield and also killed them so they died? So strange that one of our cards that will allow us to draw through our deck and get a very, very strong board state of lands is this 50-cent staple that everybody knows that we are just going to be abusing and giving him every reason to be a sad robot. Then we have Patriarch's Seal. Oh, the things we will do with this. Patriarch's Seal is a mana rock that most of you are familiar with. At least I hope you're familiar with. This lets us add a mana of any color. That's fine and dandy. For 3 mana, maybe a bit overcosted, but if we spend 1 more mana and we use it, we can untap a legendary creature we control, like our commander. This will allow us to create multiple instances of our commander's ability. This means that we will be able to make a lot of token copies of a thing. Let's say we're very low on advantage. What if you could get a free ramp 2 draw 2 every single turn just by spending 2 mana and tapping your commander? Would you do that? If you had 1 chance, 1 opportunity even, would you take it? Or would you let it slip? I think you would take it, because you're a decent Magic the Gathering player, which is why you know how to use decks that have shoestring budgets and only dreams to live on. But let's move on to the lands. We have 7 mountains and 13 plains as we lean further into the white. We have dual lands in Command Tower, Fury Calm Snarl, Boros Garrison, Sunscorched Divide, Alpine Meadow, and Sacred Peaks. The Sacred Peaks and the Alpine Meadow have been selected as they are the lowest cost dual lands we can get that have searchable types. So we can get these with Core Cartographer. I do not like that they are tapped lands, but I will accept tapped lands when we have to have them. We also have fetching lands in the form of Terramorphic Expanse, Escape Tunnel, and Evolving Wilds, with their somewhat upgraded versions being Shire Terrace and Promising Vein, since they come into play untapped, and in our deck, oftentimes we will never have to sacrifice these to get their actual colored mana out of the deck. We can just let them be on the board doing their thing. Then we have Myriad Landscape, which is a ramping land we have access to, and every dual color deck should be running a copy of. Finally, we have 4 utility lands, beginning with Restless Buviak, which allows us to have Boros mana, but we can also turn it into a red ox that whenever it attacks, we put a 1/1 counter on target creature we control. Now, you will not always need to have access to this ox, you will not always need its ability, but oftentimes it will work out very well for us to have that ability in our repertoire. Throwing an extra 1/1 counter on a 3-fold Gearhulk Thunderfold dude will not hurt us in the slightest, but it will let us make a lot more gnomes. Then we have Draenith Ruins. It can put 2/1/1 counters on any non-human that entered the battlefield this turn. Boy, I wonder if our deck is comprised of any of those. Then we have Pit of Offerings to get rid of problematic graveyard threats, and Ruins of Oran Reef, which can put a single 1/1 counter on any colorless creature that enters the battlefield this turn. Boy, I wish we had some of those in this deck. That said, I think that does it for the mana, and now we need to talk about budgets. What happens if you have a bit more of one to invest in the deck? Now let's go ahead and talk upgrades. I really think that upgrades don't just mean monetary, but for us it's mostly going to be monetary, with one exception. I do think that Angel of the Ruins is a perfectly reasonable thing to throw in the deck. I did not find room for it in this version due to the lack of ramping ability in the deck. I think that it's a wonderful card in many decks that abuse this type of thing, but I chose the Meteor Golem over the Angel of the Ruins for my build, personally, to keep the mana curve a little bit lower. But I do think there's a place for Angel of the Ruins in this deck, as it does exile 2 artifacts and/or enchantments. Mere Retriever has the ability to be really good, since every time it dies, we get an artifact from our graveyard to our hand. Puppet Strings allows us to tap or untap a creature, giving us more access to our commander's ability. Arcbound Overseer is another Arcbound creature. This modular creature has modular 6, so he's one of the best candidates for copying with our commander. Arcbound Ravager, also another very wonderful modular creature to throw into the deck. Probably one of the best ones, since it has the ability to just turn himself into a free win. Our commander really can make use of this by making one of these copies flying. Arcbound Reclaimer has another wonderful bit of utility in being able to let us reuse Arcbound creatures. And Arcbound Crusher is one of the strongest modular creatures in the game. Every time another artifact touches the board, we get to add another 1/1 counter to the Arcbound Crusher. And it's already got Trample. What's not to love? I wish I could have fit these in the main version of the deck, but of course they are a bit expensive. We also could protect our commander with a Swiftfoot Boots. We could proliferate our board a bit with Karn's Bastion. We could add some more ETB removal options with Witch's Enchanter and Lorna the Third Path. Protecting our entire board besides our commander can be done with Boros Charm. We have the ability to untap our commander a lot and potentially do even more in a turn if we have Staff of Domination, letting us draw cards and untap creatures basically as much as we have mana to do so. Echoes of Eternity is really cool. If any triggered ability of a colorless permanent we have activates, we get to copy that triggered ability. And when we cast a colorless spell, we get to copy that as well. So being able to copy all of our Arcbound creatures while also being able to copy their abilities that move things around our board is fantastic. And honestly, I need to go revisit Liberty Prime and go shove this in there. A Skull Clamp would be one of the best upgrades to add into the deck, as it does give you a very consistent draw engine with our commander's ability. Uncivil Unrest gives us supremely good access to a win con, since anytime one of our 1/1 creatures would deal damage to a permanent or a player, they deal double damage instead, meaning that our entire board becomes hyper lethal. Then we have Caretaker's Talon, another good bit of draw engine because we are trying to make so many tokens. And then finally we have the Ozolith, the most expensive but also the coup de grace here. Our deck can reach critical masses of absolute stupid with the Ozolith. Here, let me go ahead and explain why. Now, if you read the Ozolith very closely, it says, whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on the Ozolith. At the beginning of combat on your turn, move any counters that were on it to any target creature. Now, if I have you look at an Arcbound creature, right? Modular 2 says, when this card is put into a graveyard, you may put its 1/1 counters on another target creature, like, say, you know, your other Arcbound Crusher, right? The Ozolith's trigger is not a graveyard trigger. The Ozolith triggers when a creature leaves the battlefield. The graveyard hitting is a completely different trigger. This means if, say, you have an Arcbound Reclaimer with 2 1/1 counters, and it dies, it will transfer 2 1/1 counters to the Ozolith because of the Ozolith's ability. It will also separately transfer 2 1/1 counters to, say, your Arcbound Crusher. This means that Ozolith is effectively doubling all of your 1/1 counters on anything that you need as long as creatures are constantly dying, as it effectively clones the Modular ability because it is a separate trigger. Knowledge of this is cursed knowledge that will break people's board states and make them unable to evaluate whether or not you have lethal. Trust me on this, half of the wins that Hardened Scales players get in Modern is because opponents cannot read our board states properly. That's all. So typically with the conclusion section, I usually keep it very simple. Let's go ahead and talk about what I like about the deck, what I don't like, what you should do, should you pick it up, all that other fun stuff. For now, though, what if I said screw all that? What if instead we went ahead and flipped over to this card table here and did a quick example of what to do on a few turns? So let's talk about keepable hands. Right now, with this hand, we have access to both of our types of mana that we need. We have a mountain, we have a plains, and we have a spirited companion plus a circuit mender, so we have access to draw. While we don't have access to ramp, we do have access to an engine right now, so this may be keepable. So let's go ahead and say we keep this hand, we draw a card, we have Argus Coast. Cool. We're playing a plains, and we pass our turn to the series of opponents. Next turn comes around, we go ahead and play our mountain, tap 2, and we play a Spirited Companion, drawing us a free card. Now we have our third land because we made sure that we kept a hand that played something on turn 2 very quickly and also gave us what we needed. This means our commander will be able to come up very quickly. Next turn comes up, we play a plains, and we take a look at where we're at. Do we need to establish our board further with what's in our hand, or is our commander more important? I would argue our commander is a little more important as we currently do not have access to any more cards. Normally, we want to play our commander on 4 mana so that we can instantly make use of his ability. But as right now we have no other moves that are really valid, we need to go ahead and do this one to advance our board state. Now when we get to turn 4, we draw, and we are lacking in mana. But that's fine, because we are going to use one of our mana, tap our commander, and we're going to get a free draw out of our commander. And while we do not have the land yet, we are missing a land drop, we do still have a play, because we can drop down the Throne of Geth. Right now, we are still not out of moves, as Circuit Mender is in our hand. We have access to stuff in the next turn, but we would like to see another land. Next turn comes up, and we do see the land. We can play the plains. Now, if we have lost anything, we have the Junk Diver and the Redemption Choir to get things out of our deck. But as we haven't lost anything yet, we can go ahead and establish our board state further. Let's go ahead and begin by summoning the Arcbound Hybrid. This will have 2 1/1 counters on it. Now that the Arcbound Hybrid has 2 1/1 counters on it, it does have haste, but most people are going to have board states we don't want to attack into. So we're going to use the Jolly Balloon Man in a following turn to make copies of the Hybrid. We play our land, we tap it, tap the Jolly Balloon Man, we make our copy of the Hybrid on turn 5. Well, should be turn 5. We missed a single land drop. That's fine if we're not playing at a super high power table. Now we have our copy of the Arcbound Hybrid. This token copy is going to be tapped and attacking for 3 power on somebody. Not a huge thing, but we can go ahead and tap our Throne of Geth to sacrifice it at the end of the turn when we finally get there, and we'll be able to get more stuff out of it. For now, though, let's go ahead and take a look at our hand and see what we need to do. For my money, the correct thing to do is play the Circuit Mender right now. Oh, no. This will gain us a couple life and will set us up for a good Argus Coast turn later. We need 7 mana to make the Argus Coast turn work, and we know that our opponents are going to screw us over the minute we have that mana available, so we don't want to play him too early. But we gain some life from this, we go ahead and do the Arcbound Hybrid thing, we sack the Arcbound Hybrid token at the end of the turn, and then suddenly we're in a good position, because now our Arcbound Hybrid has 6 power. It gained 3 power, or it gained 2 power from the copy dying, and now it gains 1 power from the proliferate. Sorry, it is at 5 power. The next turn comes up, and while we didn't get a piece of mana, we did get the most powerful Arcbound in our deck for the most part. We got the Arcbound Shikari. So we can go ahead and play that. Now it's going to add a 1/1 counter onto every other artifact creature we control. This means our Circuit Mender is going to now have an extra counter on it, and our Arcbound Hybrid will have an extra power on it. So we can go ahead and make this a 6/6. Cool. Now, when we make a copy by using more mana with the Jolly Balloon Man, this will create another copy of the Arcbound Shikari, adding more counters on the board. So the initial Arcbound Shikari is already going to have a power and toughness of 3/3. The Arcbound Hybrid is going to gain even more, as its power and toughness is going to be at 7/7, with the new one entering the board, and the Circuit Mender has another counter on it for what that's worth. Then, of course, after this token copy attacks and dies, and we sacrifice it to the Throne of Geth, not only will it come into the board, adding another 1/1 counter on the Arcbound Hybrid, right? And another 1/1 counter onto the Arcbound Shikari, it's also, on top of that, going to be taking the 2 counters that it had, because it was a copy of the Arcbound Shikari, and adding those counters onto another creature. For us, we want to go ahead and add them onto the less important creature, because we don't want to make the most important creature on our board look too threatening. We want to make it look like the Arcbound Hybrid is where all of our eggs are stacking. Now that it's a 10/10, we can basically safely throw this at our opponent turn after turn after turn, because they're not going to be able to throw enough resources at it to stop it. Now that we have another Plains, we have 6 mana available, and we can go ahead and take a choice of what to do. If we lost any cards on previous turns, now would be a good time to get Junk Diver or Redemption Choir out to get those cards back. But since we don't have that at the moment, we instead can forego using our commander's ability to go ahead and spend a turn putting Sigarda's Summons out. Now the Circuit Mender, that has 2 1/1 counters, because we added those on previous turns, is going to be a 6/6 flyer. This Arcbound Hybrid is now a 14/14 flyer, and this Arcbound Shikari is now a even bigger flyer. This is now a 8/8 flyer, able to swing at people. We don't have the mana to make another token right now, but we don't really need one. We have a threatening board. And if our opponent tries to kill any card on our board, we'll sacrifice it to the Throne of Geth in order to throw its counters everywhere and get proliferates off of it as well. If we get mana on the following turn, we will use Argus Coast to make a coup de grace happen. We did draw the mana. We can go ahead and play that mana. We can tap out except for 3, and this will give us our Argus Coast. If nobody responds to the Argus Coast, we then pay 1 mana into our commander and 2 mana into Argus's ability, and this will allow us to make a copy of the Spirited Companion, drawing us a card, the Circuit Mender, giving us more life, the Arcbound Hybrid, giving us another 2/2 on the board, and the Arcbound Shikari, giving us another 2/2 that also adds more counters to the board. However, on top of all of these extra copies that we are making, remember that they have 1/1 counters on them because of the Arcbound Shikari. This means that they are actually 4/4 angels to begin with. So just our Arcbound Hybrid that's right here is going to end up being a 15/15 angel. The copy of the Arcbound Hybrid that started out as a 2/2, proliferated up to a 3/3 because of the Shikari, and then became an angel from Sigarda's Summons, is a 7/7, swinging at our opponents. The Circuit Mender is also a 7/7, swinging at our opponents. Well, this basically means that, or it's a 5/5, swinging at our opponents. This ends up being harder and harder to conceptualize if I don't have paper cards out on the board, but I think you can understand kind of the logic behind what the deck is going for. Use the commander, copy different modular creatures, and then when those copies die, the counters never truly go away. You will be flitting between a go wide board state and a go tall board state. As long as you keep a hand that has 2 or 3 mana and some cards that'll give you access to draw, you can basically get a very dangerous board state off of playing a single card a turn. This has the benefit of making your gameplay not seem very threatening, so you get to go under the radar, but it also means that you get to have super fast turns. You play a card, you do a game action, you hit somebody, they die, or they don't. This means that not only do you have a very healthy game where everybody is not monopolizing other people's time, but also you have a very powerful deck that didn't require a lot of combo pieces to do. Everybody has full access to the knowledge of what your deck is doing. Nobody can complain about your deck doing a powerful thing because they had the ability to interact with it the entire time. All the pieces were on the board for them to see. Nothing came out of nowhere. Everything was there for them to observe, and if they didn't deal with it, that ends up being a them problem. This isn't a dies to removal thing. This is a way to build a deck where sucker punches and infinite combos don't happen. That's just a personal preference of mine. That said, oh boy, that's a weird board state. Let me know what you guys think about this deck and what improvements I could make on the gameplay. I basically just took a random hand that came out of the deck and played it out and saw what happened. So let me know what you think in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already. Maybe consider supporting me on Patreon if you want to. That said, you could also, I don't know, hit the bell notification icon, all that algorithmic stuff that YouTube likes. Also, if you really liked the video, maybe share it with a few friends. As always, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, just wanted to give a quick thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who help keep me afloat and help keep this channel going. YouTube and Twitch are wonderful platforms, but at the end of the day, stability is not one of their strong suits. If you want to support my channel, then obviously Patreon is one of the best ways of doing that. Link is in the description. But I do want to personally thank everybody who has contributed to the channel. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Briskreek, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Raveler, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Autumn and Angel, Nixie Chan, Mark Anthony, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hatamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fireshard. And everyone else who supports my channel and lets me do what I do full time. This is a dream job of mine that I never believed that I would be able to take full time, and with your help, I've been able to do it. So thank you so very much for that. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you all are having a wonderful time. I will see you all in the next one, hopefully.